So I've always had this unbridled sense of adventure. I was born in Ireland. I've lived all around the world. So I grew up doing student exchanges. From the age of 11, I went to spend time with a family in France, went to a family in Germany. I actually, at 15, went to Russia. I came back from there thinking, I don't need these material things. What I need is experience. I need to expand my horizons. I knew that you could survive and be very happy with very little. It allows you to make decisions around your career, around where you want to live, and it gives you the freedom to change your mind, to decide the direction of your own life. I think that is a key piece of agency that you need to take on as a young person. We're all essentially building the bridge as we go across it. All of these emotions, insecurity, in a sense of inadequacy, imposter syndrome, they are universally felt by everyone at every stage. Time is a blessing and a privilege, and we could run out of time at any stage.
You're listening to the She Lift Project podcast, a show dedicated to helping women achieve higher levels of success in the workplace. No matter where you are in your career, we want to help you grow. Now here's your host, Cynthia Kirkpatrick, a CPA, CFP, and Senior Financial Advisor at Moneta Group.
Welcome to another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. I'm Cynthia Kirkpatrick. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm excited to have, for the first time, a colleague on the show, Aoifinn Devitt. You've worn many hats, but right now we'll talk about you being the senior member of our global wealth team. You're based out of London, but all over the world, speaking, helping others, doing everything globally in this financial space, and fellow podcaster. So she'll definitely be in the right space to give us a lot of good things today. So thank you for coming.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we'll talk a lot about the podcast, your journey to where you're at today, what that is. Also, a mom, a lot of kids, traveling globally, having been a chief investment officer too in many spaces. I'm sure a very good perspective in just the industry, internationally, what it is to be a highly successful professional woman.
Well, it's a lot to cover, but thank you very much for saying all that. Yes.
It's amazing how much we can get through in about an hour plus. And so many people talk about how they haven't reflected on a lot of these things. So it's a fun time for us. And I think I've heard it's a fun time for those listening to us. So when we think about where you're at today, wow, senior member of the global wealth team. That's a lot of words. I could try to explain everything, but let's have you do it.
Well, thank you. So I've been at Moneta 5 years. My anniversary was actually just yesterday. So that has been a great milestone. And my transition here has been from Chief Investment Officer, as you mentioned, into more of a strategist role and ultimately onto the client side. Because what I realized as a Chief Investment Officer, I think you know where your strengths are, you know what you're missing. And what I really missed was that day-to-day interaction with the clients. And ultimately the accountability, because I think the work we do is worth nothing if we're not accountable to those for whom it matters. And working with clients, solving their problems, helping them along their journey, that gave me tremendous satisfaction. So I wanted to get back to that side. The global side is just part of who I am. I was born in Ireland. I've lived all around the world. I see that I don't have to make choices between where I want to be, the network I want to have, the clients I want to serve. So having a global perspective and what I describe as my glorious, messy international life. Many others also have a gloriously messy international life. It has its pros and cons. It is messy, as I mentioned. There are many currencies you need to think about. There are many different systems you need to navigate. But I feel I have had some skill set now developed based on my messy life. And I'd like to share that with others. And I'd like to help them navigate and see that anything is possible.
Yes, so much of what we do in life is based on experience too, right? You can help people when you've had kids, you can help people this or that. And I think the global side of things, especially currencies, how quick information changes, the cultures and the nuances of, as we're recording this, we're still dealing with Iran, how it really is even more interconnected and fast. And so you having those experiences, I'm sure, is very helpful for those who, that could be daunting, saying, I'm going to go work in a different country. What does this mean?
It's interesting. I grew up in Ireland, so that's an island country. We don't have great mountains. We don't have fantastic sunshine. So you always have to go to further shores to get that, essentially. So I grew up doing student exchanges. From the age of 11, I went to spend time with a family in France, went to a family in Germany. I actually, at 15, went to Russia for an exchange right after that country had just opened up. So I've always had this unbridled sense of adventure. And I honestly think you're born with that, because I look at my own children and some of them have it, some of them don't. So I have have that. I don't see that boundaries are necessarily boundaries. I'm insatiably curious, and I love traveling. I love languages. I don't mind about making mistakes in those languages. I'm happy to just give it a try. And what I learned when I got on the ground is that you can never really read about a country or a culture without experiencing it. So having been in these in intimate situations across Europe, in Russia, as I mentioned, that was quite unusual. I then, in my career, I immediately went to New York from Dublin after graduating college, worked in New York, then went to Hong Kong, kept pushing those boundaries even further. And when I was in Hong Kong, I then went to Indonesia and to Malaysia and Thailand and Philippines, working on some of the more extreme projects there. And that again gave me a very intimate knowledge of what was happening on the ground there. I was also there during some pretty devastating financial crises for those countries in question. And that again showed me that life goes on, even if the media is showing pictures of your currency falling through the floor and of people in dire straits. There are still people who have to make a living and for whom life goes on, and there is a life beyond the headlines. And so I've always become a little skeptical of what I read about coverage of international areas. I think it's ultimately about people, about chemistry, about what you see on the ground. And I am just addicted to that. So I will always be traveling insatiably and trying to gain more experience. And also using those experiences to make our daily life more relatable to the clients I work with. Because it could be that in the sample set that we look at, say, here in St. Louis, we're not going to see someone who's had a very similar experience. But if I can bring in my sample set, which is so much more broad because of the international coverage, then I can start to find a relatable situation for them.
I'm thinking of 11-year-old Aoifinn doing her first abroad trip. What was that? Is it just so standard, or was that even new for you and the people you knew? What was that like, and how do you go to your parents and say, hey, I'm going to go to a totally different country for a while. I'll see you in a few months, or whatever it might be?
It's a good, very good question. I'd say a little bit of both. My parents were young when I was born. They were also pursuing their own adventures. We had been, at the age of 5, we'd taken one of those Volkswagen vans and spent 10 weeks traveling across Europe in clothes in cardboard boxes. It was a very kind of a rough and ready trip. So we clearly all had that sense of adventure. When it came to me, I was a little bit young for my age, so 11 was definitely on the young side. In Ireland, it's quite common every year to see these hosts of Spanish students descend on what was then a safe Catholic country to learn Spanish. So I knew about the concept of student exchange. And when it came up, I think I may have said to my parents, can I do this? Can I go to Paris, learn French? What I remember is being absolutely desperately homesick, crying on the phone, that the old days of rotary phones and calling and thinking I was never going to see my parents again. And the first week was probably pretty miserable for my host family because I was so desperately homesick. But then I was thrust into a school environment. I learned a lot of French and ended up really developing that independence and that knowledge that you can survive anywhere. It was a great experience. It also was a very enriching experience. And from then I was addicted. Every year as a teenager, I'd go to a different country.
Yeah, Russia has gone through many different kind of times, if you will. Obviously, right now, we're still dealing with Russia, Ukraine, and Putin and that. So I think you're 15, I think you said, going to Russia. It just opened up. That sounds insane, if I'm being honest.
It was a little out there. I remember how we saw it. I saw it on a poster at school, in my high school. There was Russian, Spanish, German, Spanish, French exchange. They were fairly standard. And then Russia was there. I said, well, that looks kind of interesting. It was a 2-week exchange, not a 3-week exchange. There was no presumption of knowing any Russian in advance. And it was what they called a cultural exchange, not a language exchange, because nobody in Ireland would have learned Russian at that stage. So the whole point was that this city, it was called Chernobyl. Well, it was actually Sverdlovsk. It was then called Yekaterinburg. The city had been a closed city. So the city had been where the reason I was mentioning Chernobyl had been where they had nuclear weapons manufactured, and therefore they had closed the city to any foreign tourists for decades. It was just opening, so they were looking for a reason to have a press corps and have some international visitors. So we were there essentially. The red carpet was rolled out for these 20 Irish teenagers who were going to do an exchange with their 20 Yekaterinburg-based teenagers, all around the same age. So we were treated like royalty from start to finish. But yet I was staying in an apartment building that was fairly brutal in terms of its architecture. It was fairly basic in terms of the access to, say, fruit and vegetables and groceries. We had to get in line for certain groceries. Again, I wasn't that culturally aware. I was given caviar and probably the best of the best when I arrived in this family. And of course, I didn't like it because I'd never seen caviar before. So they'd probably gone to great extreme to get this caviar for me. And then I promptly didn't touch it. So clearly, I needed a lot more coaching in the ways of being more culturally inclusive, but a tremendous experience. And I think that really, really affected me in a formative way, because I came back from there thinking, I don't need these material things. What I need is experience. I need to expand my horizons. I knew that you could survive and be very happy with very little, because this family I'd been staying in clearly had that. And I also was just encouraged to keep learning. I did go back to Russia 4 years later, learning the language, studying in Moscow. And it really just opened that whole well of curiosity.
So you kind of went through pretty quickly, teenager, graduation, you've been to all these cities, all for work. I mean, how does that, you went by it so fast, yet you got a lot packed in there.
That's a lot. I think because when you have a hunger to learn, the Achilles heel of that, or the downside of that, is that you learn quickly and then you're like, okay, what's next? Where next? Where's the next experience? So when I went to New York, for example, after my college years of studying law, I was in a law firm, an international law firm, had a great experience, but they needed someone to go to Hong Kong. So after 2 years in New York, I said, well, why not? I have no particular ties here. I like adventure. I've never been to Asia. I could learn a lot. And I did learn in a very different way in Asia to the way I learned in New York, because New York was the headquarters. Things were done according to precedent, according to a certain path. When I went to Asia, there was no precedent for the situations we were dealing with. There certainly was no playbook for an international crisis. So we had to draft contracts from scratch. We had to navigate situations that were unprecedented. And that, again, builds a kind of an entrepreneurial skill of thinking on your feet, of working with what you have, and not necessarily needing a playbook for everything. So that was what Asia gave me, was this tremendous set of tools to be able to really, I think, cope with a lot of unexpected and uncertainty in life.
So you're going through these different countries, learning a lot of languages and learning everything else. I think about, becoming a chief investment officer. That's a big, at least in my world, a big deal, big accomplishment. And, you have that all throughout your resume. How do you get to that point of, you mentioned advising people before, stepping away from that, chief, how does that play out?
Well, my first chief investment officer role was actually in a public pension plan in Chicago. I started that in 2016. And building up to that role was I kind of went at it from in a way, a little bit backwards, in the sense that I started out with the most specialist asset class, say things like private equity, private credit, real estate. They're called alternatives broadly. They tend to be highly specialized and requiring, I suppose, more time and more effort, and certainly higher fees, but they tend to be that 80-20. You would spend 80% of your time on these, even if they only represent 20% of your portfolio. So that was where I started. That was my post-law career, was in hedge fund analysis. And then I realized that, having started at the most specialist end of the asset spectrum, backing out to look at the entire asset class would not be a huge step. I had been a consultant for many years, really working around clients, giving them the pros and cons of everything, and never actually sitting in the chair of the driving seat of making those decisions. A chief investment officer, it may sound like you're in the driving seat. You still have other decision makers and other stakeholders that you need to work with. In my case, at a public fund, it was the board, and that board, which was the entities making the decision, that they were public representatives, and they were also members of across the private sector, or they had been retired police officers. So I had an 8-person board, quite eclectic in its mix, in some cases with internal conflicts, and that was the board that I needed to manage as chief investment officer. But it was a perfect time, came at a perfect time in my career, because there is a time when we need naturally to step out of the weeds and start to recognize that there's a younger generation coming up. They may well have that specialist knowledge, say on the manager selection side, on the in-depth asset class side, but we, just like you mentioned, in terms of the experience of getting older, the years of experience, we can, I think, develop those heuristics, those instincts, those ability to instantly make a decision. And I think also the courage to make a decision. That comes with experience and with age. And the Chief Investment Officer role I took on in 2016 at that stage of my career was a perfect way to really bring together all of that skill set. I will say being a Chief Investment Officer in a public pension fund is quite different from being a Chief Investment Officer in the private wealth segment in an RIA. In our case, here at Moneta, I was more managing the centralized investment function, and our clients were not beneficiaries of a public fund. Our clients, in that sense, were our 25 plus partner teams that we were managing their investment selection for.
Yeah, when we do this podcast, we often like to try to relate somebody's experience to just general business knowledge. And for those that we've had business owners, people becoming leaders, you talked about getting out of the weeds and taking risks. And I'm not sure how much we talked about as a leader, taking risks and making quick decisions, how important that is. But if you have anything more to share there, that again, that's so important as you move up in your career or you try different roles to get comfortable with that, to gain experience in those areas.
I agree. And that's why I felt I was really reaching my expiration date as a consultant, because the consultant by definition doesn't really have to take the decision. They should present the 4x4 matrix, the pros and cons, and both sides of the ledger. And then the client makes the decision. And I felt that was missing that critical piece, because to me, the flip side of a decision is the accountability for that decision, sticking and basically justifying your decision and really dealing with the consequences of that. That to me is the ultimate reward, because it's the ultimate proof statement as to whether all the work you built up to now, whether it actually made sense, or was it the right advice or not the right advice. And I suppose that was for me as a Chief Investment Officer where I really started to develop my own instincts as to making a right decision. But I would also say a little bit it came earlier, because in 2006, I broke away from Cambridge Associates in my own firm as a consulting outfit based on basically multi-asset consulting across the private segment, so across all alternatives. It was what we called a label agnostic consulting firm, designed to capture all the asset classes, including ones that fell into the cracks. Because what I already saw was that a siloed approach that did not account for the cracks was not going to be comprehensive and was not going to be solution oriented. So setting that up very much out of my living room, my table, it was really a bootstrapped organization. That forces decision making, because you have to make very quick pivot decisions as to what's working, what isn't. And if something's not working, you have to quickly pivot. I launched that firm in 2006. It was about hedge fund investing was really going gangbusters at that stage. We then had the financial crisis in 2008. All the wheels came off that bus, and we very quickly had to pivot into a reconstruction mode. So thinking about reconstructing portfolios. And when it comes to portfolios like that, we had to really get into rehabilitation mode. That was where I built a lot of client goodwill and connection. But I'd say when it comes to the to whether the decision making had to come from that, because when you have to eat and you have to find how to put food on the table, you very quickly have to abandon things that are not working.
Well, at that point, did you have kids? Did you have a family? I mean, I think from probably going from what would be maybe a very secure role and position to building this on your own. And as you mentioned, 2 years later, less than 2 years later, we're in the financial crisis. Like, what was that conversation of, I'm doing really great here, but I'm going to start this thing from scratch?
It's funny. I actually was pregnant with my fourth child when I left Cambridge Associates, a stable paycheck, a stable role, a successful, I'd say, position in that firm to do this. And my thinking process was, if I don't do it now, I'll always wonder what if. What if it's phenomenally successful and I regret not having done it earlier? And maybe it was a kind of a blind confidence that I've had since I went to that family aged 11 in France, just it's going to work out. And it's going to be fine. And, I will live by my wits if necessary. So obviously you do that with a little bit of some money to fall back on. You don't do it and completely cut yourself off. But you also have to assess your situation. Do you have, what's your cash flow you need? What kind of outlay? My children were young enough that they weren't looking at high school fees at that stage. So it seemed like the right time. And I never, clearly my perhaps bank balance might have been stronger had I stayed in a more stable role. But I do think that the learnings and just that evolution as a professional that you gain from going out on your own is very, very much irreplaceable.
We pay a lot of money for colleges and potentially private grade schools, high schools. So in that instance, you're paying for that experience and that education and that knowledge. It's not any different.
It's a great way to think about it, yeah.
I just thought, it just came to me while we were talking about it. But also something you said, you were pregnant with your fourth child. What's also amazing is how many children you have and that you're married and that you can keep all this going. So not just 4 children, but I'll let you explain from here.
Well, thank you. I suppose that's a great big presumption that I am keeping it all going. I suppose that's nothing will humble you more than children, and especially many children. There's a sort of presumption that you either have an economy of scale or that you get better at this as you develop. You add multiples to the equation. I have 9 children, so I have 7 girls and 2 boys. And the age range is between 7 and 25. So quite a lot of different, I suppose, dynamics going on in there. I will say there is some element of experience that assists you along the way, but there's also another sense of where every single child is different. Every single child will challenge you. You'll never know if you're getting it right. There's no proof statement like I mentioned before. And what I find is it's you really learn about parsing your time and attention in a way that is not always equal, but you hope is equitable. And you recognize very quickly, and I think this is actually very much how I relate to clients, is that every child has different needs at different times. And you cannot give the same to every child, nor can you really be, as was drawn on the classic refrain of a child, well, that's not fair because this is not happening to X, or you're not saying the same to Y. That doesn't bother me. That's not what X or Y needs. So this will just you'll get what you need. I love it, obviously. Clearly, we're not in an age where you have 9 children without it being voluntary. And I do get a tremendous amount from my children and from the legacy that they represent and from seeing them thrive. I will say clearly the burden of, it's more the mental burden of the uncertainty that life provides. Whether we talk about AI and displacing jobs, now I have to wear that uncertainty, not just for my own role, but for times 9, because I will be looking at each one hitting the job market at a different time. You always wear that as a parent, I believe. And clearly you don't know because it's all the thing of skill and luck. Did they work out? Did this child turn out well because I was skillful as a parent? Or was I lucky that the social media interaction with this child and their schooling came at a certain time? Or did that other child hit the COVID, I think, hardship at a time in their trajectory, and did that set them back? So it's a constant set of questions, I'd say, when it comes to being a parent, but it is deeply humbling and rewarding.
I always think that being a parent is similar to being a leader, and I think very good that you brought in of also how we work with our clients, because they're all different. They've all gone through different experiences. COVID was a big game changer and how that impacted people. I'm sure I feel like as a parent, that's helped me change how I do business or has helped educate me in business and as a leader.
Absolutely. I think seeing the hardships like that. And I think what I often remind my children is attention, because obviously as parents, we give them quite a lot of attention. Sometimes it's unwanted attention, especially if it's a little oversight of whether study is being done at the right time. What I try to remind them is that attention is what is the sincerest form of generosity. So when we are providing attention, believe me that is probably a scarcity in their life that others will care as much as we do. And when it comes to our clients, I think that level of attention that we can provide to their individual situation. And this brings me to podcasting, because what I think is the most underappreciated aspect of interactions is listening. And why do people as guests get so much out of being on a podcast? Because they are being listened to for 90% of the time. And I think most conversations don't go that way. And most people are not listened to. And when you are listened to, you will reveal so much more about your story, about your strengths, your weaknesses, what makes you who you are, than if you're not being listened to. And I think we go through life not being listened to for the most part, nor are we listening sufficiently. So I think that aspect is a key part of attending to clients, is listening to them and not simply delivering what we want to deliver, but listening and realizing that what we wanted to deliver may be redundant, that we should actually deliver what they need to receive.
The podcast, because it's been around for a long time. We'll have you talk about it, but how it came about, what episode you're on, what you talk about and put out there.
Well, I've 2 podcasts. The first one is called 50 Faces. I started that in 2020. And I had been working at the Chicago Public Police pension plan, and they have an aspirational goal of investing about 20% of their assets in what they call emerging managers. And emerging managers, as defined by them, would be minority-owned managers, so managers owned by women or ethnic minorities. And that is, they want to empower the segment and to ultimately to ensure that capital flows into an area where it is scarce. So that led me to meet with many managers who came from this minority classification. And what I realized was that there were so many unsung heroes in this space, whether it was somebody, a deputy CIO at a public pension plan that was slowly but surely ensuring massive inclusion and opportunity for either her team within the pension plan or for the managers that she was enabling to take flight by providing the spark capital. And she may not have had a PR firm. Probably in a public fund, she would not have had a PR firm. But I felt that there were people in the industry whose stories needed to be told. And if we look at finance, I think let's accept the fact that there are many loud participants in our industry who suck the oxygen out of a lot of it. So there is a lot of doubling up of exposures, perhaps, of certain individuals and others who are not getting that level of exposure. And I wanted to help to amplify these voices. I also saw during COVID, and I learned a lot from listening to podcasts myself during COVID and getting executive coaching through my ears as I was running or whatever during a lockdown. I found that hearing from role models, hearing how people like you have navigated situations that you may well face, gave you a script, gave you a sense of solidarity, gave you a sense of being able to move forward with confidence. And especially as a woman in finance, there are not many role models out there. There just aren't many examples of people who've had to navigate the same decisions. So I felt that if I can collate a collection of role models that have inspiration in their own individual way, this will then be a library that people can draw upon. I called it 50 Faces to be a way of committing to doing at least 50 that year. That was 2020, and now 2026, we're up to over 350 names, and we keep finding names. It's we try to be representative in that we always have at least 50% women, which is quite unusual in the financial podcast area. And we have many people from different walks of life, different levels of seniority. Every single one is, to me, a gem. People ask me if I can pick my favorite. I said, that's like picking my favorite child. There's no such thing. So I think having that wealth of conversations has been a true privilege.
And then you started a second podcast.
Yes, Markets Happy Hour is 2 years old, and that has come out of something I did as a CIO. As CIO, I wanted to be visible. I joined this firm, as I mentioned, 5 years ago, post-COVID. People were working remotely. There was a sense of needing to know and put maybe a sort of a face on that CIO role. And we were still remote, but what I did think was possible was to have this virtual water cooler moment every Friday at 11 a.m. So I'll be here, I'll be on Zoom, I'll talk about the issues I see in markets, what I think is relevant to your clients, and you tell me what you're hearing from your clients. So we'd have this water cooler exchange every Friday, and that started out small, but it grew in traction. We ended up with very much a fixture in everyone's Friday diary. And then when I ceased to be CIO, I wanted to keep that cadence, because to me, that crystallization of how I think about markets every week is a very key way for me to, it's a shortcut really. It's a way for me to consolidate my thoughts and then be able to share them with clients. So Markets Happy Hour is once a week, always on a Thursday, bringing together sometimes guests, sometimes just myself speaking about market events. And again, it's become kind of a habit now.
So it was birthed, created here at Moneta for Moneta, and has expanded really beyond these walls to include guests from all walks of life in the financial world, but also to share then with clients and people. And we haven't even touched upon it yet, but you're regular on various financial, Bloomberg, CNBC, you name it, all the news places. I mean, you're hopping around not only nationally, internationally, jumping on these newscasts, these shows to talk about the markets.
I love it. I will admit it. To me, it's like playing tennis and the international, the news coverage, because there's no script. I do work much better without a script. Maybe that's a weakness of mine. I don't like to read off a script, and it has its downside, not having a script at times. You will be left flat-footed or you mute in some cases if you can't say something. But I do like the unpredictability of it. I feel it really kind of sharpens your reflexes, sharpens your ability to articulate at short notice. And that's why I love being on the news shows. I love to enrich their conversations with some of my own perspective. But what the whole point of the Markets Happy Hour, and I think should be the point of financial appearances and news appearances, is to translate the macro backdrop into something actionable. The action may well be take no action, but there is something that has to be relevant to the client, to their portfolio, help them make sense of what's going on. And maybe then, as I said, the action is do nothing, sit tight, which is usually our advice. But I think that's the important thing, is always answer the so what question as well.
And with who we work with, and also in the news, it's so much about, as you were talking about a little bit there, taking a very complex, potentially complex situation and bringing it back to the basics, bringing it back to language that's understandable so that people feel like their partner in their decisions and understand a little bit better and aren't just being, talked at with these terms that they don't know what to do with.
It's interesting. My philosophy on that is always around knowledge is power. So I wanted to, when I started my own business in 2006, I was breaking away from an established endowment and foundation consultant, Cambridge Associates, to work with public pension plans. My own mother has been a public representative for 35 years. She was elected to the county council. So I grew up going in and out of these local authority, county council, city council offices. I used to do my homework in there. So I was deeply embedded in the sense of public service. I saw the work she did, the painstaking work she did as a public servant, and also the abuse she got and the lack of thanks. So I saw it all. And I think for that reason, I have massive respect for people who dedicate themselves to public service. Equally, because they dedicate themselves to public service, they are not necessarily getting the highest pay packages. So there is not always the access to the same talent pool in public service as there is in the private sector. And because of that, I saw that there was sometimes snake oil being sold to these public allocators, like the pension funds. And I felt that just provoked a visceral reaction in me. The idea that these hardworking public servants were being sold products that were inappropriate for their needs, particularly hedge funds, complex, private assets, private credit. That to me was just a scandal that these things were being sold in that way. So the work I did from 2006 in my own business was to work with these public plans to provide essentially a buffer between them and maybe the snake oil salesman, to empower them through knowledge, and to take these complex concepts, particularly around private assets, and distill them into readily understandable concepts that were in plain English. Because a lot of the time, this jargon, the veil of complexity is completely unnecessary. It's put up there as a way of separating what is deemed to be an expensive, highly skilled set of services from what it should be, which is really a solution for a portfolio to be diversified. And I try to break that down. And I felt like by putting myself there as an advocate between the allocator and the seller, I was protecting the allocator.
As you're talking through that story, I'm thinking, okay, core values of Aoifinn, to take risks, be courageous, keep learning all the time, but getting back to truly helping people in, I don't know if using the words the right way is, but really just honestly, openly helping people.
There's a little bit, I think maybe it comes from my being from a small country in the periphery of Europe. Now, it is a country that punches above its weight, no question. Certainly now they've done phenomenally well with attracting foreign investment and has really got its place on the world stage. But we are still a country with a population of 5 million or below, and we do not exist as a large financial centre. So maybe that sense of being the underdog has kind of carried me through my whole life. And not only has it been a desire to break out from that sense of being an underdog, but equally a sense of supporting the other underdogs and really empowering them through giving them a seat at the table. But equally, when it comes to the podcast guests, amplifying voices that are less well able to amplify themselves.
You probably, well, not probably, you do have a unique perspective as we're recording this in St. Louis, Missouri, that you grew up in Ireland and visited so many other countries for however long those educational stints were. How is growing up in Ireland different, and how did that maybe shape you to who you are?
Well, I wouldn't say we had a very privileged upbringing, any of us in Dublin in the 1970s. It was not a particularly beautiful city. We'd have been growing up, I suppose, the lower end of the middle class. There certainly wasn't a lot of money around. There wasn't a lot of money. We weren't discussing stocks over the Wall Street Journal and trust funds on a Sunday. My parents are professionals. My father's a doctor. My mother's a teacher and a politician, as I mentioned. And they've all their generation would have gone to college. So we certainly had that, the shoulders of giants in that sense we could stand on. But I'd say what it did teach us was a humility. And I think there's a fine balance between humility and feeling some kind of an inferiority complex, which I think some people from smaller countries can feel. And we never felt that. We always had this maybe false confidence, but a lot of that comes from family psychology and the focus on academic excellence and the expectation around academic excellence that came from my grandparents and was instilled in my parents and in my generation then by default. So I'd say that there was never any sense of us not being able to take on anyone anywhere, but it was more just we wouldn't have had necessarily the social capital that maybe other countries would have had, say, with a different kind of set of class structures. That wasn't present in Ireland then. It's growing now, but even still on the financial side, it wouldn't be tremendous. I did go to Trinity College, which is one of the more well-known institutions there, and I actually sit on the investment committee there. It's a part of who I am. I'm deeply proud of that. And love to go back there. It's a wonderful campus of the city centre of Dublin. I was a scholar there, which is another it was an extra level of participation. It means that your tuition is free, you get to live on campus, and it's quite a prestigious academic accolades. So that was another as was a way of proving myself as I went through college. So I'd say those are the factors of being from Ireland. It's, as I said, it is that balance between not letting an inferiority complex or begrudgery, which can set in from smaller countries, cloud what you're capable of.
I'm glad you brought it back to that point, because I think many people, especially women, struggle with humility while also in life and careers advocating for themselves and self-worth and knowing who they are and what they are worth. How do you manage that, or combine that and still be, it's just a difficult thing, I think, for women to navigate. You don't be too aggressive, but be aggressive. Don't be, too boastful, but be humble. Like, how do you do that?
That's a great question. And I said, going back to parenting, there is no magic formula. There is no one way that works. I think you cannot be a friend and a parent always at the same time. You have to be strict. You can't always be nice guy. So I think there good cop, bad cop is really embedded in all of us, especially anyone who's a parent. But I would say, in terms of what I learned from both my pre-podcast era, which was listening to other people's podcasts and getting coaching from that, as well as what I've confirmed with my podcast era, is that all of these emotions, insecurity, in a sense of inadequacy, imposter syndrome, they are universally felt, and by everyone at every stage. And I think clearly there will be some that keep it more under wraps than others. But I see massive insecurity across the men in our industry, men who've made plenty of money, who you would think by other measures have been seen to have arrived. There's massive insecurity. There's always what a good friend of mine describes as compare and despair. So if you compare yourself to others who are greater or lesser than yourselves, and usually the ones that are greater than you, you will always come out looking like you're lacking in some way. My grandmother had the poem on her wall, the Desiderata poem, which I used to spend a lot of time at my grandmother's house. And it said, there's one line that said, there will always be people greater and lesser than you. And I think I internalized that from a very early age. And I think so because I was top of my class, came first to my class, top marks in the end of both college and university and high school. But yet I was always humbled by that. I always knew that there was somebody better. And I think that sense of self-awareness, many people experience. So therefore, the whole idea of how as a woman you assert yourself or not, I think we have to recognize that there is no magic formula. We're all essentially building the bridge as we go across it, finding that solidarity with other women. So if someone looks like they have it all figured out, they probably have not. And I think just recognizing that, not to take them down because of that, but recognizing that that's their way of coping today and letting that be letting you just accept that. I'd say when it comes to, it's difficult. I mean, it's well, I suppose, rehearsed and well recorded that women come across as being, whether it's too assertive, too aggressive, in other ways that would just be considered strong leadership skills. And I think the key there is finding your people in terms of your superiors or your firm cultural backdrop, where you can be as close to what you think is your effective self. I don't say your whole self, your true self, because what is that? That's always evolving as well. And I think there's an effective self. And that effective self should be what you strive to deliver in any workplace you're in.
What are some things that you've done in that personally to kind of advocate, assert yourself while also being humble and knowing there's somebody better than you and there's somebody less than you?
I'd say when it comes to my leadership style, I definitely tend to delegate a lot because, as I mentioned, I recognize I'm out of the weeds now. I don't need to be in the weeds. I also use a little bit of reflexivity in the sense of I do not like to be micromanaged, so therefore I do not micromanage others. So that takes an element of trust and delegation, and I've definitely learned to do that quite well. Again, getting back to having had my own business, you cannot micromanage everything. It would exhaust you. It would completely deplete you. So it's important to find people that you trust. I'd say I consider myself a reasonably high output person. So therefore, I expect others to have a similar level of output, which means that I have to select a team extremely carefully, because if I find people without the same level of output, that generally won't be the right balance for me. So I'd rather have a small, more nimble team of people that have also got high output that I can trust to deliver that output. Interestingly, I've had a firm which we didn't have a large, say, bank balance or salary allocation. We had to let people, this is in my own company, we had to let people come in and learn on the job and see it as a learning experience more than a way to secure a decent salary. That led me to have people that stayed based on their learning opportunity, not based on their salary. And I think that is a key thing. If people want to work with you because of what you will allow them to grow into, as opposed to what you're going to pay them, you will get much greater loyalty from those people. So that's, again, a management style. I've made plenty of mistakes in terms of going into hierarchical firms and blowing it by trying to, usually it's come from operating too quickly. I know that's perhaps a weakness of mine, is that I do operate at a very fast pace, and that is not for everyone. And sometimes implementing change requires buy-in first before just bulldozing through a piece of change that may be necessary, but perhaps could have been more delicately managed.
Yeah, buy-in is important, whether it's business, relationships at home, kids, all of that. So, the proverbial bull in the china shop doesn't always work when you need to bring others along with you, which, as you talked about, as you grow out of the weeds and you become a leader, there's got to be times where you are fast, but also then how do you communicate that with the buy-in and the come along with me versus being told, change, let's go.
Yeah. I suppose one key difference between being a parent and the workplace would be, as a parent, I mean, there are sometimes as a parent you just know what the right outcome should be. You know the best choice for the child. You have got enough of a gap between your experience and theirs that you just, sometimes they don't know what they want. That their brains are growing, they're adolescents, they don't know. In the workplace, I think we have to assume people have emerged from that adolescence period, and they will have a comparative advantage around the skill sets. And I think it's about harnessing that skill set. I think some of the stuff I did in my 20s was actually pretty good. So I would like to harness that in the team members that I work with in their 20s.
I'm going to bring us back to some part of the conversation earlier where we talk about, being in finance, being highly successful, up the ranks, if you will, for lack of a better term, and in an industry that is ever changing, highly technical, educational, fast-paced, you name it, more male dominated than not. What has that experience been like, or what have you learned in different countries being in this male dominated industry? Anything that were obstacles that you had to overcome, or you thought they would be but they really weren't? What has your experience been?
Well, I'll first start by saying I love this industry. I am so glad I found it because I didn't grow up knowing much about it. As I studied law. My family are doctors or in teaching, so we didn't have any concept of what financial markets were. And it's safe to say that Dublin, as a peripheral European capital, did not have a huge stock market or a lot of financial activity. So I learned about this through my time in New York, Hong Kong, and London and beyond. So I love every minute of it. I love the dynamic, fast pace, the fact that it forces learning, the fact that it forces both high level thinking of structures, model structures, industry structures, as well as granular thinking about an individual stock and individual security. It's never dull, and it has some fascinating, intelligent people in it that are always stimulating me. So I'd say that part is fantastic. I'd say, it also requires constant reinvention and constant, I'd say, hustling to stay visible, because it's a fast moving industry and people come and go and their reputations come and go. And for that reason, there is a sense that you have to be on it in terms of wondering, am I still relevant here? And that's a demanding thing to have to contend with, that you have to be reinventing, learning, and not really just sitting back and coasting, because I think you will get swept aside. As far as the fact that it's male dominated, that is still true. I'd say also our field, podcasting, is also male dominated. And it means having to, I think, find like-minded individuals that will support you, because I think a lot of what I see among, say, senior men is there's an element of aspirational quality of some of the more senior figures in the field. For example, I see it now with the large tech titans. They seem to have a massive following for anything they say, whether it's related to tech, finance, religion, social policy, politics, because there is an aspirational quality to these leaders, whether it's the amount of money they've made, that the aspiration that the people have to be like them has led to them having a lot of followers. So we as women, I don't think we have necessarily got that same mirror neuron appeal to the masses of financial members who are mostly men. So I think we will naturally maybe not have the same natural followers as I see it, which means we have to pivot to develop our own individual identity that is basically one that would be worth following. And I think that is, in my case, it's pursuit of the marketplace of ideas. I love ideas. I'm always seeking out ways to debate and encourage salon discussion and get people on the podcast and really just thrash out an idea. And I think when you show yourself as someone who's willing to operate at that level, it doesn't matter what gender you are. It's just about ideas and driving them forward.
Yeah, in reinvention, I think some important pieces there. One, who are you? Knowing who you are and being more authentic and true to who you are versus trying to be somebody else. That won't ever really play off well. People see through that. But then being yourself, how do you continue to reinvent yourself? And what are some of the ways that you've done that, where you've reinvented yourself to be seen and to be visible?
Well, I will say you have to do it quickly. That's one thing, because pivots take a little bit of time to execute, and therefore you have to make a pivot. You can't think a long time about making the pivot. You have to just do it. And I think having my entrepreneurial experience of my own business, I am also quite good at throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks and what doesn't. So I'd say I've done that in a few occasions, whether it's around trying this podcast style or trying this way of discussing an issue or thinking about this strategy or that strategy, or thinking about a fund, pursuing a fund approach, or instead going for more of a kind of an advisor role, which I have done in many cases. So I'd say just being able to look at ways of where the puck is moving, that classic expression, and see what's needed. I'd say now, for example, governance is an area that is emerging hugely within finance in terms of one where governance experts are needed. We have to look at how AI is evolving and what roles it is taking and what roles it is leaving wide open for humans to fill in as their best selves. And that is an area of judgment, advice, trusted partnership with individuals and clients, and being able to do that, I think, is key. And how do you become a trusted partner? When you truly understand that client and you truly understand their nuance. And so continuously reading around that client's profile and finding similar and connection, being able to be someone who makes connections. I think that's another real non-replaceable skill that humans can do.
Yeah, they talk about AI and how quickly will it replace jobs? How will it impact the finance world and what we do specifically, which is, wealth management, financial advising, planning. There's something different than going on ChatGPT or whatever you use and getting some information, and it's not always right, versus a person. How do you see AI both affecting, financial markets, but what we do?
My view throughout my experience has been that effort and hard work always rises to the top. So if you are a professional who's always really just left nothing on the field, like really just been, or left it all on the field. I think it's the expression. If you've left it all on the field as a professional, you will therefore be able to, I think, excel in this environment, because the props and the assistance and the crutch that AI can provide, that to me is, if you don't need it, you've never needed it. If you've always needed a crutch, you now have an easier to access crutch. So I think we can definitely elevate as humans who have been able to always put in effort and reap the rewards of that. So when it comes to AI and our particular business, again, we can definitely introduce efficiencies. We can introduce tailoring and customization that may not have been present before. We can also be able to tailor the presentation to the way a client likes to see information. I think that's a huge benefit. But when it comes to the human interface, what I think I was most struck by when I moved to private wealth from institutional investing was how little the investment piece mattered, and how much that coaching, that hand-holding, that holistic approach to portfolios, which really AI can't capture as well, how much that mattered. How much answering that age-old question, will I have enough? Will I be okay? That is such a huge part of it. And equally, the playbooks, as it was discussed, are all around accumulation. Often there's very little playbook for the decumulation or for that spending down phase. And in a way, we're writing that playbook because we haven't had this kind of a problem before. And if you look back over the decades, maybe it's a quality problem to have, but it is definitely not something that there's a huge amount of experience in managing. So that's where the human element comes in, because there is no script for this. So we can do cash flow modeling and thankfully use AI to cut some of the grunt work out of that. But in terms of us having our ability to actually to innovate, work with clients and be flexible around their needs, I've huge hope that will always be needed.
Yeah, I kind of chuckled as you were talking there, because yes, with what we do, there's a very big technical component to it. However, I would say, equally needed is that emotional intelligence and that ability to connect and comfort and make sure that they're with you as you move through these things. I mean, I tell people all the time, and I don't know how you feel about this, that we're invited into somebody's life more deeply and more personally than probably anyone else in their lives. Their doctors don't know what we know. Their attorneys don't know. A lot of times their children don't know what we know. And what an honor and a blessing and, real responsibility to walk through that with them. And can AI replace that? I don't think so.
It's the accountability piece that I cannot replace. It's the skin in the game. And our skin in the game is our reputation. And that is something we guard, I think, extremely jealously. So therefore, if we continue to worry about what people think of us and whether the referral will flow or not, a referral will flow if you've done your job properly and you can say that hand on heart, you have delivered value for that client. So focusing on the value we deliver, I think, is a huge part, not just on delivering something, anything, a work product, but actually how is that work product adding value and being amplified in the right hands.
And sometimes when people say, well, what do you do? Or you try to explain, I try not to forget about all the technical side of things. But as you said, it's that service level, it's that responsiveness, it's that accountability, it's, leaving everything out there on the field, making sure you're bringing everything for that client. And it's every tool in the toolbox being used.
Exactly. Yeah, that I couldn't agree more. And that to me is a feeling of work well done. And again, getting back to children and what we instill in them, I think that feeling of a job well done, that is a tremendous feeling. The feeling of effort, the feeling of digging deeper and seeing it being rewarded. If you don't allow people to have that feeling, you are robbing them. I would think one of the most essential feelings of being human. So to take away the quality, doing quality work, to take away the quality of effort and actually striving to produce something and overcoming hurdles to do so, if we take that away, what is the point?
Yeah, it's purpose. You know, you see people who are living and working with purpose and those who aren't. And what a different way of life. And just seeing them, you can see that difference. You brought up children, and earlier you brought up a little bit about when I run, I listen to a podcast. What we have not talked about, and most people won't know, is that you run a lot. To say a lot is understating. I mean, marathons, you're everywhere. Talk about, I mean, how do you do it?
Well, I suppose it gets to the law of comparative advantage. What was I not good at? I was not good at sprinting. I may move fast in my head, but I don't move fast necessarily on a running track. So I knew I wasn't going to be good at that. I wasn't going to be necessarily good at the hand-eye coordination sports. Although I've taken up tennis more recently, and I'm at this stage it's fine, but certainly not at a younger age. Team sports, again, because of the lack of speed, wasn't always picked for the team as a first few picks. So running was something that I figured was on my own time, on my own standard, and also I was accountable only to myself. And I realized early on I had decent stamina. What I lacked in speed, I had in stamina. And I'd say that's actually probably a relatively true statement for the rest of my life, actually, is stamina, as opposed to necessarily fast-paced sprinting. So the stamina part has always lent itself to long-distance running. Did my first marathon in 1995 in New York City, and have done them pretty much consistently since then. I've even done some pregnant or having recently delivered a child. I've done the 2 a year for pretty much, I'd say, the last 15 years, and now I've done about 57, I think.
What's the magic number, or as long as you can do it?
Oh, 50 was the magic number. I've passed that now. Yes, just like 50 faces, 50 marathons. So no, now I'm doing it as a kind of a discipline for myself, every 2 a year. And marathons it's about that psychological journey. It's about that testing of, the 4 hours. You know it's not going to be pleasant. So you're thrusting yourself into a situation where you will have pain. You will have a struggle in terms of, do I want to finish this or not? But you will also have a triumphant feeling when you overcome that. So it's almost a masochistic tendency to push yourself into that, but equally they're good fun. You get to see new cities, you get to add another medal to the rack, and it's, as I said, it's the comparative advantage. It's the one thing I'm good at, from at least according to my benchmark, and that's why I do it.
Well, that's an important thing about life and business, right? That oftentimes the biggest challenges, or the things we're procrastinating on the most, or the thing maybe we're most fearful of, when you just get in there and you do it and you get past it, through it, you're done. The most rewarding, not only from a sense of accomplishment, but learning and growing. That's kind of life.
Exactly. And my father, I mentioned, was a doctor. And I think when you have a medical professional in the family, you tend to have a fairly high threshold for things being hard. So, we had to go to school with all kinds of ailments because we weren't, dropping down on the floor. So I think for that reason, I've always thought, most things you can cope with. I will also say, I think running is a great way to combat anxiety and stress. And that to me is a massive part of my daily diet, I suppose, in terms of the frenzy of both family life and professional life. Having this time, which is either in silence or with a podcast, is just a piece of that puzzle that needs to be there.
I agree with you. I run every day. It's been 6 years, and I look forward to being outside, being by myself, and learning. So I can relate to that. And I'm sure there's many people who are either doing something similar, some sort of exercise or whichever, or saying, what can I do to juggle life and deal with all of those emotions? Speaking of juggling life, and I know some of us at Minetta have asked this, and I'm sure there will be others out there who are asking, how does she do it all? 9 kids, married, you're all over the world with podcasts and your job. How do you do it?
Well, first of all, I'd say I always have had a sense that time is a blessing and a privilege, and we could run out of time at any stage. So I suppose I have always led my life thinking, well, I could run out of time. For example, I did recently 3 consecutive trips to South America because that was on my bucket list. And I was like, well, if not now, when? When do you start to finally tick off the bucket list? When you're too old to enjoy the things, the active, perhaps pursuits down there. So I do believe in seizing life a little bit by the horns, so to speak, and doing that. And similarly, taking trips, whether it's to Australia or to Asia, it's just a question of buying the ticket and doing it. There's not like a massive hurdle there. Things are with Google Maps, you can pretty much get anywhere today. With an ATM card or your Apple Pay, you can pay for anything. Things aren't that difficult in terms of traveling. So I just got on with that. In terms of how I juggle it all, I suppose I have found ways to be very efficient in my day, which is funnily enough why I don't feel I get a lot of enhancement from AI tools that can help you manage your calendar, because I've always managed my calendar in a fairly intuitive way that is has been quite efficient, I think. So it's not always great for other people. I will say some other people don't necessarily understand how that calendar gets managed or how my time gets allocated, but I suppose it's worked quite well for me. And equally, getting back to the children, it's giving time where it's needed, not recognizing that's not always the same amount of time at every time. And I see this, one of my sons has autism, and for him, he's 15 now, he's preparing for exams. He needs a tremendous amount of time, much more than a typical child would need with that kind of one-on-one work. So we've figured out a system. He sits beside me in my office. We're kind of back to back. He's doing his exams, his physics or his math. I'm there as a kind of a guide if necessary, but I'm working away on my computer. So that is our system whereby I can now give him the time he needs, because the time he needs is so much more than the time some of the other children need. But I think it is about to each according to their needs, and then from each according to their ability.
I in my head, I'm thinking, do I ask this? Do you think any of your kids will have that many children?
Definitely not that many children. No, I'm hoping they'll have some at least. I hope they haven't at least be put off by that. But I have heard the warnings that if having been in a family this large, there is sometimes that the pendulum swings the other way when it comes to the grandchild component. But I think they've seen the benefits of having many siblings and having a bit of a cohort. Sometimes when we go out, people presume we are the local play group that has hired the function room for the day, and said, no, this is just my family outing.
And I think I only have 3 children, and with all we do and kind of the evolution of life in the world, I've taken more as a female, taken more on outside the home. My husband, who's sitting right back there, sometimes I reference him, he's back there, that he takes on different things, and we have to juggle back and forth. I mean, I would imagine you find that absolutely necessary to be able to
100%. My husband is a huge support in my life, a pillar in terms of enabling the kind of travel I do, as well as maintaining the doctor's appointments, the knowing where the soccer bag is, knowing where the swimming bag is, ensuring that we sign up for gymnastics at the right time. We do have our relative strengths. I wouldn't have him do piano practice, for example. That's strictly my domain, but he knows how to tune a violin and I don't. So therefore he gets the string instruments. So we divide and conquer always. Means we don't do a ton of things always with all children at one time, but dividing and conquering, I think, is an essential survival skill, and it works very smoothly. But I would not be able to do this without his support.
Unless you guys are all going out and doing your play troupe together as the local talent.
The Von Trapp singers. Yeah. It does look like that at times.
That's fantastic. I will think about that from now on. Thinking through so much of what we've talked about today, thinking about 11-year-old Aoifinn and her daring and her courage and her wanting to learn, working through Russia, thinking through, we can get by with less, that it will all work out. And to hear what you're doing now with your kind of some of your pivots in your career and at Moneta, and both helping people nationally, internationally with knowledge about finance, but also helping people one-on-one to say, here's your plan, here's how you achieve your dreams in life. Seems like a path that was always there.
I really like the way you brought it together, actually, because it does kind of come down to something that I think distill into some simple truths that I think I'm realizing. And that's the beauty of passing 50 and getting to different stages. I think things do fall into perspective and other noise falls away. And that is the clarity that we get at this stage of our careers, which I think is undervalued and fantastic, but is a well-kept secret as well, because we don't know to look forward to it. So I'd say, just in terms of what has been a thread through all of that, first is agency, being able to decide the direction of your own life. I think that is a key piece of agency that you need to take on as a young person, and realize that sadly nobody else is going to do that for you. So we may think that there's this a guardian angel, or there's a sponsor out there that is going to magically put you on the course, the yellow brick road to success. I think it's a fantasy, and that you have to drive your own, and you can drive your own destiny. It won't always be smooth, it won't always work out first time, but you can drive it. And I think that is something I knew from the age of 11, but very fiercely independent from that age. And then the second thing is around the living with less. I think, again, a key part of independence is living, not needing much to ensure that independence. And being able to live on less, I think, is a massive flex in life, because what does it do? It gives you choices. It allows you to make decisions around your career, around where you want to live, and it gives you the freedom to change your mind. And I think a key thing is we get locked into situations where we are beholden to them from a financial perspective. But if we know we can live on less, we can then have the freedom to change our minds.
So with what you're doing today, thinking of all the people are going to listen to your different podcasts and see you on TV, and they're going to say, gosh, I need to work with Aoifinn. I need to, have her help me. What are all the different people kind of niches, or how you help people who this would be a great fit?
Well, there's a few ways. As I mentioned, I do sit on investment committees. So I think that, often investment committees draw on someone who's had a deep experience within global financial environments. And I think having that is, as a member of an investment committee, that's one way. I have had a lot of experience, I would say, the good, the bad, the ugly, whether it's in financial markets and ups and downs, or in structures. Having worked through a number of financial crises, you've seen structures that don't work, governance, oversight methods that don't work, gaps that become critical gaps. And I'd say that sort of governance sense is something that I've honed quite well. So in terms of that level, it could definitely be used there. Obviously at Moneta, we have a financial advisory practice where I would say my skill set is particularly leaning towards the global side of things, given that I have, as I mentioned, a visceral understanding of what it's like to be sometimes one foot on one side of the Atlantic, one foot on the other, and to have commitments in different currencies, different places, and to honestly feel like you belong in different places. I think that is the other thing. We don't have to choose. I think that is one of the key things that I have learned in life. We are often forced into these maybe false choices of you have to make up your mind. Do you live in this country or that country? And yes, strictly from a tax perspective, we have to have a residency, but we can have our ties, our networks, our even our real estate in different places. We can have our souls be cut up and allocated to different places. And yes, we have to continuously travel to maintain that connection, but we do not have to choose. So I think, as I said, getting back to that gloriously messy international life that I have, and that I appreciate how glorious it is, but I also appreciate that it needs a little bit of management and sometimes a hand to hold along that way. So I would say I could be that hand.
And everywhere, every place to find you, because it's not going to just be Moneta. It's not going to be just LinkedIn. I mean, you're a lot of different places. Name all of those quickly so that if somebody sees a way to connect in that role, they can find you.
The absolute best place to find me, I'm going to say, is LinkedIn. I found somebody else that way when I'd taken the wrong laptop at LaGuardia Airport. I was able to find him on LinkedIn and he was able to find me on LinkedIn. So I would say that is the definitive place to find me for any of these roles, podcast related or professional related. That is the one thing that doesn't change, I think, over time. Clearly on our 50 Faces website, I'm there. Moneta should have access and contact information there. So it depends on what path the individual is taking to get there.
And when we think about, I think for those who are listening to this, well, maybe they're running or they're walking, they're not watching it, they're not going to see how everything's spelled. Moneta is Moneta, and Aoifinn, I know how to spell it. I'm going to let you do it in your Irish accent.
It's Aoifinn. So every vowel other than the one that is actually used, E, and then Devitt is easy one, Devitt.
And I always thought, okay, Aoifinn, A-OK, like A-O. So that's how I always remember, Aoifinn. Well, thank you for sharing what an interesting journey and story and insights and wisdom to help those navigating not the same, but probably very similar situations where, maybe should I do this is underlying, or fear, or being courageous, or pivoting, or moving fast, but remembering sometimes you have to move slow. So there are definitely people out there who relate to the things that you mentioned. And as you said earlier, sometimes we need to see those stories, hear those stories to feel like we're not alone. So thank you for coming and sharing today.
Thank you so much. I'd say if I were to conclude what my lessons learned would be is show up in life, do your best work, dig deeper. You have only one life after all. So this is what I try to instill. And there are tremendous rewards that come from that showing up, and take agency and own your story, because nobody else will own it for you.
I can't think of a better way to end. I can't. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
This concludes another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. To hear more episodes of the show, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about our mission of helping women reach higher levels of success, visit sheliftproject.com and sign up to receive the latest news, ebooks, videos, and more.